Welcome to Psych for Psychology, a Nystrom & Associates podcast. Our host, Brett Cushing, is a licensed marriage and family therapist at Nystrom. Each week, he talks about all things mental health and therapy with guests, and you get a chance to dive into specific psychology topics that help promote personal development and wellness. And now, your host, Brett.
Hello and welcome to another episode here on Psych for Psychology. We are delighted to have with us Kaylie Willprecht. I said that correct?
Yes,
Willprecht?
you did great.
I said Willprecht correct. Okay, so we are delighted to have Kaylie from our Nystrom & Associates Hugo office. And so, Kaylie, welcome. We're going to have you talk about psychotherapy and the military. And I'm really delighted to have Krista and I, we're thrilled because we know the military, you carry a heavy burden. And I think sometimes we don't fully understand how this impacts you, how it bleeds into every area of life for you, and the challenges of getting help for mental health issues. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you kind of ventured into this area? This is kind of like a specialty, can we say, for you in therapy?
Yes, it is. So I took kind of a military niche, so to call it, in my therapeutic approaches because right out of high school, I joined the Army. And I did that for about 6 years. And it's actually where I met my husband, who is also military. We met on our deployment. And so I was in a unique position where I did serve, and I have background experience in that. But then even after I left the military, I turned into a military spouse. My husband elected to stay in. And so now I have a unique kind of approach to that as well, where I've seen being in and I've seen being out on the family side. And also as a parent, we have our own little son, and my husband continues to deploy. He's very active in his military career, and he comes and goes quite a bit. And so I've even seen it from the child perspective, where just how impactful military service can be, not only on the service members, but also to their families. And that is extremely important to recognize in mental health.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you gave that overview, because right before we started recording and we were chatting about it, I was like, man, what a perfect combination of experiences to have to do what you do, right? Like you were saying, you've kind of been on all sides of this coin, so to speak. And so, yeah, your clients and those you help are really fortunate, I would say.
And I'm confident people who are listening have people in the military, they might be in the military themselves, and so this is going to be really practical because we want people to get the help they need and have therapy be, as we talk about a lot here, approachable. And yet it's not very approachable for people in the military. Could you maybe talk about that a little bit, why it's difficult? What are the challenges?
Yes. So in the military, mental health is very stigmatized still. They do not push you to seek help for mental health. It's very hush-hush. That is because we are classified based on our deployability. So if you cannot meet certain criteria, then all of a sudden your chain of command, your higher-ups, your superiors will frown upon that because you are no longer deployable. You're not able to fulfill your service. So you become looked at as less than. And so it does create that stigma in the military where we can't talk about it. And we're pushed to go to the VA, which is understandable. We're here just for military. However, once the VA gets a hold of that mental health record, many service members believe, I can't fulfill my job anymore. People are going to find out and I'm going to all of a sudden be discriminated against. And so it's one of the biggest things I want to touch on is that the VA and mental health care services outside of the VA are very unique in their approach. So even the VA has a division for their mental health component now, which they've just updated this year, where you can seek mental health services. Wow. But still many service members don't know that. And if they do seek help in an outside source practice like ours within Nystrom, we do not necessarily have to report that information back to the VA. And service members don't know that.
They don't know that their records at Nystrom or whatever the outside clinic might be will not be released to the VA.
Yes.
Wow, that would be a game changer.
Yes.
To know that, like, what I tell my therapist is protected,
Yes.
right?
And I think this really captures in a very pointed way the problem that we have in general is that mental health help therapy still has a stigma. I don't think as strong as in the military, but as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking people in the military, what a double bind. This lose-lose. I really want to go and be deployed. I get into this to be deployed, fight a foreign country. And so I want to do this, and yet I can't because I'm depressed. I have trauma of some sort. And so I can't go and I can't stay because if I get the help I need, I'm stigmatized and ostracized. And it's really hard, too, because it's not like we were talking earlier, like a broken arm where people can say, oh, wow, yeah, you really need some help. It's so subjective, and people sort of look at that like, yeah, you're depressed. You're fine. Rub some dirt on it. Get out there kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to really show people, no, I'm really struggling and not have the incurment of people's judgments.
Yes,
mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah. How would people, so I guess I'm thinking about you're practicing out of the Hugo Clinic. How would a veteran who is in need of therapy find you even? Like, is it just kind of word of mouth? Like, I've wondered that a lot because it's not like, I mean, I don't want to speak anything badly about the VA, but it's not like they have your name and they're like sending people to you, correct?
Yes.
Right.
So they try not to outsource therapy. They try and keep it in-house.
Sure.
So for us, what we can do is we can put it on our provider profiles.
Okay.
And discuss the military background and our competency in it.
Okay.
Which is always what I recommend if you are able
Sure.
and have some experience working with this population, especially near us in the Twin Cities. We are actually very close to the 1st 34th Infantry Brigade, which is a National Guard unit.
Okay.
That deploys very frequently.
Wow.
So we actually have many military service members in the area. And I've even talked to a couple coworkers up in Big Lake who even mentioned there's significant veteran population up there.
Wow.
And they want to work with this population, but it's very hard to connect without certain experience being met.
Sure.
So that's why I recommend putting it on your profile if you have it. And again, that word of mouth, getting it through your clinic. Hey, I do have some experience with this population.
Sure.
Use all the references you can. And then actually, military resources are very significant, but there's catches to these. So it depends on which branch you're in, which component you're in, which I can dig deeper into if needed.
Sure.
But it is very dependent. So if you are in the Army, if you're active, if you're National Guard, your resources are all going to be very different. And then you can incorporate those as well. So even having a background or resources that can be applied, which I have resource pages available to use, but even a quick Google search. What resources are out there for Army? What crisis lines? They have their own crisis suicide hotlines. So you can text, email, chat, but it's just for veterans.
That's so helpful.
So knowing those resources and applying those is important too. And
totally.
Explaining that to the veteran that, again, you can use these resources and it does not have to go back to your unit. It doesn't have to go back to the VA.
Sure.
So for people that are listening who have somebody in the military, like a family member, or they know of somebody, what they want to be looking for, it's not going to be a big sign on the road that says therapy for military veterans, etc. It's going to be a little more, to use military language, covert, right? You're looking for therapists that have maybe experience in the military, and then, okay, they get it. This is what I'm looking for.
Yes. Okay. And I actually recommend all my providers. So our DA is unique. It's a little outdated, I would say, on
our DA.
Our intake, excuse me.
Okay.
So all of our providers, when we do intakes and we kind of get the background information on who we're treating and their history, so we know how to best treat them, we do ask about military experience.
Yes. And it's like
a
yes or no, isn't it?
It is a yes or no. However, it says, do you have previous military service? Yes or no. Ever deployed in a combat capacity?
Mm-hmm.
Yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's components that are missing there. We haven't included Space Force yet. That is another component that's been added. It doesn't include length of service or component, whether you were National Guard, Reserves, or active duty, or if you were a family member of someone who served.
That's important, isn't it?
That is extremely important because if we look at the rates for depression, anxiety, PTSD, suicide, they're skyrocketed for not only military, their spouses, and their children.
Sure.
Wow, that's really helpful, I think, people to know. For me, hearing that, I know it's hard on the family, but to hear that those same type of things affect the family, that's eye-opening. Can you tell us more the experience? What's it like for people in the military and for their families, so we all get a better understanding and compassion for what you all go through?
So from the military side of things, having everything be so stigmatized, when you do seek help for mental health, it's very important that people who provide care for military members, that we reiterate that confidentiality. That what you say in here is meant for you. It's covered under HIPAA. We cannot talk to your unit. We cannot talk to the VA unless there's a release on file. So reiterating that is very important. And then also acknowledging certain customs and courtesies, I would say. So for instance, if somebody comes in and they served in the Marines and you say, oh, I noticed you were a Marine, that is a red flag to a Marine. You do not say you were a Marine.
Good point. You're once a Marine, always a Marine.
Yes. So there's little pieces like that that will throw off military members in right away when
Just
they come
straight
in.
out the gate.
Are people in the military, is it hard for them to trust? I've worked a lot with police officers, and they don't trust people in general, and then they come into therapy like, I'm not spilling my guts to this person. So is that similar with military?
Yes, very much so. So they are very hesitant to share what they're going through because a lot of them feel like civilians cannot relate in that capacity. And so that's where we kind of lean into that under engagement, where I'm going to repeat my story and just kind of talk about how I'm feeling, but I'm not going to bring any emotions. So the way I explain that is they'll start to sound like a broken record when they talk about anxiety, depression, and trauma. So they might come in and say, yeah, I'm depressed. I sleep more. But they won't say, I'm really sad. I'm hurting. I need help. I can't sleep. It is going to be very blunted.
Sure.
And that is similar with military family as well.
Okay.
On occasion, because spouses especially, you bought into this. You signed up for it. You married into this. You knew what you were getting into. You should be able to handle it.
Ooh, there's the key word. You should.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's that stigma for spouses that come in. And then even when we ask that question in the DA, have you ever served? And they have to say no. Well, in some capacity they did. And they are at a higher risk than civilians. It's shown through our data.
Right.
So maybe one of the big should messages is you should not have emotion.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So that is a big message that goes out to military families and even children, especially if they're growing up around the bases.
Yeah.
You're surrounded by military families at that point, right? You're going to family or school with military families. You're around military spouses. Other kids are handling this just fine.
Yeah.
Why can't you?
You're looking around and seeing how that everyone else seems to be doing fine. Whether or not they are is a whole other thing. But
Yes.
Yeah.
But this is your lifestyle, and this is what you should be able to handle.
Well, that's fascinating because the military, you always hear about the military family, and you're talking about this extended family on the base. And it reminds me of many nuclear families that we grow up in. There are rules, and there are similar rules. You cannot feel. You cannot show emotion. You cannot ask certain questions. And so people have to walk around with blinders on and sort of ignoring and not seeing things and just conforming. Kind of like, hey, it's just like we march in order. We have our marching orders when it comes to our emotions.
Yes, exactly.
So what's it like then for people in the military? I can imagine it's super hard to actually admit that, yeah, I'm really sad and I'm really hurting. I have trauma, things like that. How do they get from this very closed society, if you will, when it comes to those kind of things, to being open about it? That sounds like a huge leap.
It is a huge leap. And so if they do come into your office, military or spouses, even the children that we work with, I highly, highly recommend trying to level with them. So if they talk about trauma, using their verbiage. If they say something about an IED or something about an assault, okay, say the assault instead of the trauma, the situation. Label it as they do so they feel like they're being understood and heard.
Wow.
It's very important. And that's actually across the board. We recommend that for trauma.
Sure.
The VA does.
Sure.
And trainings like prolonged exposure and
Sure. Label it how they label it.
Label it how they label it. Use their verbiage.
Yep.
And try and watch your cultural considerations when you work with this population.
Okay.
That is a big piece there. Now, to get them to open up in the office after they're in and we notice that they may be underengaged, reiterate that confidentiality. When you see them closing off, reiterate it again.
This is private.
This is private, even for the spouses, because we're taught, don't say where they're going.
Sure.
Don't say the flight information.
Right.
And the kids, right? You can't talk about it. Don't say where your dad's going. Don't say the times. Don't say the units. Don't say these things because that's a risk.
So then when they come into therapy, they're still under that, like, I can't talk about this.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to get them engaged
Okay.
is very important.
Yes.
Bring some of those emotions in. Display those emotions yourself. Some of that empathy. Wow. I can't imagine how that feels.
Yeah.
Tell me more about what happened. Can you talk about how that make you feel about certain things?
Sure.
So for us as providers and everybody working within Nystrom that works with this military population, trying to bring out those emotions and reminding them that you're in a safe place to do so.
How about for people who aren't therapists and they know of somebody who's in the military?
Yeah.
What do people in our culture need to know that they don't understand about the military, and how can they possibly help spur people on in the military to get help and things so that our society as a whole can be more supportive?
Yes. So civilian citizens, what I recommend they do is open that conversation and ask those questions. Don't beat around the bush. Ask them directly.
Like what? That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you feeling like hurting yourself?
Sure.
Are you feeling like you're having flashbacks, trauma? Do you feel like you're managing this well? Is it impacting your life?
But don't we need permission to ask a question like that? That seems so intrusive, like a boundary violation. And so are you saying that's okay?
That is okay. It's actually trained within the military as well to directly ask that. I mean, granted, stigmatized very much so.
Sure.
But to directly ask, because military, we are a lot more direct.
Right.
We tend to be a little bit more blunt.
Well, that's
Right.
really helpful. And that you reiterated the part about being blunt, because I think most people listening to this might be like, gosh, can I really just come out and say it? And it's like, yeah, be blunt.
Yes.
Like you can be blunt and you can say like, are you doing okay? How's your mental health? Like, are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling like hurting yourself? Right.
Maybe not at first blush interaction. Hey, thanks for your service. Do you feel like hurting yourself?
Yes.
Maybe not like that. But
Sure.
we have
You
some.
know them.
Yeah, we have some relationship with them.
Yeah.
Let's go a little bit further, because it is a way, I think. And tell me if you agree. Is if I were to say to somebody, family member, thanks so much for your service. I can't imagine what that was like. I think about you sometimes. Is it hard? Do you ever have urges, self-harm, things like that? That's okay.
So, yes, you could blatantly ask that and say, hey, I thank you for your service. I heard you were in the military. I just want to know about your mental health. How'd that feel? Was it taxing for you? Because I don't have that experience or knowledge. I would love to just know a little bit more.
Because what a better way to show appreciation. We're taking it further than just sort of the genuine kind of, hey, thanks for your service.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually able to show that appreciation with the people we know and have a relationship with. Go further.
Yes. And putting yourself in a position of like, I don't know what it's like, please tell me, right? Because the way that you phrased that, Kaylie, was like, I'd love to hear about your experience. Like, what was it like? Kind of tell me what it was like instead of us making assumptions, right? Because I think there is like an assumption about even the way that, veterans are portrayed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that they're, a car backfires and they're,
ducking
for cover and all that stuff. And so again, just like the way that in pop culture things can be portrayed, I think people just don't realize all that's going on for people. It's not what it might look like on TV or in movies, right? Yeah. It could be all sorts of things.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you mentioned PTSD, Krista.
Yes, I did.
Tell us more, because we hear a lot about PTSD for people in the military. And can you talk about trauma and like you've been deployed? Have you experienced that? Have others? What's that like on day-to-day living? How does that impact people, et cetera?
Yes, of course. Well, military is actually high risk for an array of mental health disorders, and PTSD is just one of those.
One of many?
One of many. And so it is one of those high-risk mental health concerns that we need to be on the watch for. Now, military PTSD, it can come in many forms. And what some people may not know is PTSD doesn't have to take effect right away. It's not, I come home from a deployment and all of a sudden I'm afraid of loud noises and fireworks and I'm having nightmares.
Great point.
It can happen years later where all of a sudden something triggers it.
Yeah.
And so that is important for civilians to know as well. In some capacity, something may be triggered and it may come out of nowhere. It doesn't invalidate it. And trauma from a military perspective, again, they really try and get you not to talk about these things because it is frowned upon. It doesn't prevent you, again, from deploying, but also when you come back, all of a sudden, oh, now you have to go through the VA. Now we're looking at disability. Can you even serve anymore?
Even the way I'm watching you say that, I see this look as you're enacting that, this look of disdain almost that you in the military are seeing and receiving from somebody like, this is not okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my personal experience in deployment, they do a lot of front loading with you where you have to sign off on documents, understanding, hey, you might be putting others' lives at risk and you have to be okay with this. And if you're not okay with it, you need to leave. And so they do that right away, but you also know as soon as something happens, if there is a trauma, you will be repeating that trauma for documentation over and over again because you need to document it. You need paperwork completed. You need to tell it to your superiors.
And this is after the fact and like when you get back from a deployment?
This is right after the trauma.
This
is after you get back from deployment.
Okay, multiple stages.
Yes, because if you do mess up, all of a sudden it does become military investigation.
Wow.
So you're repeating this trauma over and over again, which is where we get into that under engagement that I spoke about before. So military veterans that have trauma can come in and say, yeah, this happened. No big deal. It's okay.
So is this voice of experience too? Have you had trauma yourself?
I have. Yes, I did become diagnosed with PTSD. It was a few years ago now, and I was able to work through it. I actually did have some experience with the VA that I did not appreciate. So that is why me working with Nystrom, I want to get my voice heard, get this out in the open that you can talk to other people and you can talk about this mental health.
Yes.
You don't have to live with it, whereas many of these veterans feel like this is my life. This is forever.
Sure. Even just the message that the VA isn't the only place to go, right? Because I think it sounds like overwhelmingly so. That's the way that it's framed in the military is like, okay, use the VA, then that's it, right? And you're saying, no, there's lots of other resources. You just have to know where they are and like know that it's okay to go get them.
Yes.
Yep.
So what can I ask? Did you get therapy for your PTSD?
I did.
What was that like, and what modality? I mean, without getting too technical,
Yeah.
what kind of therapy was it for you? Because it's helpful for people, I think.
Yes. So for me specifically, I actually went through CPT, which is cognitive processing therapy.
Cognitive processing therapy. Okay.
And it is very direct. You do talk about the trauma and process it. And since then, I've actually been trained in prolonged exposure. I recently did that through Nystrom as well. And so I know there's multiple modalities to treat trauma.
Yep.
Especially with military, and the VA leans a lot on CPT, which is that cognitive processing therapy, and PE, which is that prolonged exposure.
Mm-hmm.
My experience with CPT, I did enjoy it, but it is hard work. You have to be willing to put in that work.
Yeah.
I would imagine that's a bit of an understatement. And I think, too, when people have had PTSD, there's sort of this misunderstanding that you're weak if you talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
The tragic irony is that it really takes a tremendous amount of courage to talk about it, because you're actually having to go back and relive some of this, and your body's sort of reliving it as you're talking about it. So there's courage to go out in deployment, and then there's tremendous amount of courage to have to talk about when you get back.
And get help. And I wanted to throw one more piece in there, which is the way that post-traumatic stress disorder works is one of the primary symptoms is avoidance of talking about, thinking about, reminders of what happened. So to ask someone to reiterate or like re-explain what happened goes so counter to everything that PTSD is trying to protect us from. Mm-hmm. So just even like when you were saying cognitive processing therapy and just talking about the trauma, I mean, that's like PTSD is like, no, never talk about it again, never think about it again, put it away. And even the way our brain is structured, it puts it away in a spot in our brain that is like, we're going to keep this under wraps so that this horrible thing doesn't happen ever again. So it's like, I just want to kind of point out, it's a huge deal to talk about trauma.
I think about it too, as we're talking here, there's courage and bravery to go and be deployed.
Right.
And then what you experience, and then have to talk about that, the amount of courage and bravery to talk about what you've experienced is, I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, is that greater than the actual amount of courage and bravery to go in the first place?
Many military members will say yes.
Wow.
Because it's a different kind of strength. Whereas if you deploy, you tend to come back and you're almost celebrated. You know, you served. Thank you. Now you get these benefits from the military for your service. Mm-hmm. But it's a different kind of courage when you all of a sudden have that stigma added on top of it.
Yes.
You're not being praised for getting help.
Right.
Well, what a double message that's confusing.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then we can internalize that. You know, I'm weak. I should or I shouldn't be, whatever I am. I'm deficient in some way.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you're on so that you can kind of shed light on what it's like for people. And one of the things I hope is a takeaway from all of our podcasts is that as we get greater awareness that everybody's struggling with something, we move in our perception of people. We move from a perception of what's wrong with him or what's wrong with her to, I wonder what happened to him, or I wonder what happened to her. And I think you're shedding light on some things that can help us be able to sort of step back and ask a different question. Not what's wrong with people, but I wonder what happened to them. And maybe even people within the military can sort of step out of line and not sort of reinforce that message, like, what's wrong with you? You shouldn't be doing this, but I wonder what happened to you. Tell me about it.
Mm-hmm. And the last piece of information I want to address, because I know we are working with a lot of providers on here in various capacities, but also civilians, is that there is no right or wrong treatment with veterans. You do not need some specialized training to work with the veteran population. I just want people to recognize that there is some considerations, some cultural considerations, which many of us are trained in anyway. So it's adapting. What questions do we ask? How do we ask? And how do we refer to our military members while acknowledging that they are at a greater risk? So we can watch for these things.
I love it.
We are so glad you're here today. And I think people will come away with a deeper understanding, a deeper appreciation, and hopefully we can find ways to tangibly show our appreciation above and beyond the thanks for your service. I think sometimes we feel a little bit powerless. What do I say? What do I do?
Exactly.
And I think you're helping us just by having some deeper understanding and appreciation. Is there anything else you'd like to say? We're always kind of interrupting and asking questions. So
I think that's it. I just wanted to get that word out that as providers and civilians, we are more than capable of helping them.
Well, thank you again so much, not only for being on the podcast today, Kaylie, but for your service, for doing everything that you do, and for continuing to serve the veteran population. Everybody, thanks for tuning in on Psyched for Psychology, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you as always for listening, and please be sure to leave us a review. While this podcast can't be a replacement for therapy, we hope you enjoyed our discussion today and join us again next time. Nystrom & Associates is always available to those who are struggling. If you find yourself in need of support and help, please check us out at nystromcounseling.com.